Hello, today we are going to learn about integer operations. Before we get started, I'm going to go over how to set up your notebook and the materials I typically use for every lesson. So as you can see here, I've got a spiral notebook. Okay, I've labeled the outside with pre-algebra 8th, so that way I know what I'm teaching or what class it is. Inside, you should have the first 8 pages should be table of contents. So as you can see, I've already set this up. You may want to use a ruler like I did, or you can just draw the lines. You should have the date, topic, and then the page number. And as you can see here, I've already put in the table of contents, page numbers 1 through 8. You can also see that I've already put our first unit, the real number system. One of the things we are going to do in classes will be creating this, and you'll see I have a lot of different highlighters right here. I keep them handy because I typically use them, and I like to color code the entire unit. So for unit 1, I'm going to color code it orange. So that means every topic we have for unit 1 will be orange. So as you move through the first 8 pages, and you're going to see I used front and back of this, I'm going to have the table of contents. So that's what you need to do to set up your notebook. So you'll see table of contents. Notice I abbreviated it with TOC, so you don't have to write that out. I set the date, topic, and page number. You'll see I put the page numbers up in the corner. You should do that each time. I use the front and back of each notebook page. All the way to the first 8 pages. Pause this video at this time and make sure your notebook is set up that way so we can move on. Okay, at this time, you should be all set up with your table of contents, and we are going to move into the first lesson. So in the notebook, you can see I've kind of already got that set up. We're in unit 1. Remember I said we're going to use the orange highlighter to represent that. One of the things I like to do to just keep myself a little bit more organized is I like to put a little orange highlight on the edge. It's just a little bit easier to flip to the page as I may need to be. So our unit 1, the real number system. Today we're going to focus on integers. You'll notice I'm using a pen, so that way you can see it more clearly, but I suggest you use a pencil so you can erase if you need to. We're always going to set up our notebook when we are taking notes. The unit, the topic, or the objective. So today it's integers. We are just simply reviewing as this is our first lesson. The essential question. You will see later I will begin to abbreviate this as EQ. Okay? And then today we're going to do what are the rules of integers. So we're going to review that. Your job will be to write all this down as I go through it. Okay, so maybe pause the video at this time and make sure you have this all set up. So you should have unit 1, the real number system, topic and objective, integers, essential question, what are the rules of integers. Okay. As we move into the lesson, what we are going to do is we are always going to set up our notes in the Cornell style. So the Cornell style I've already got here. You'll notice I used my ruler to draw a line down here. As I'm going through this video, if there's something you don't quite understand, that's what this question section is over here. So because it's not so easy to just stop the video, ask the question, just write it down, and you may find that the question is answered later in the video for you. So as we're going through something you don't understand, just jot yourself a note so you don't forget, and then I'll go over it if you didn't get it clarified throughout this video. On the other side, or the right-hand side of this line, we are going to be actually writing our notes there. And what we are going to focus on is integer operations. Okay, so I'm going to add that over here. operations. And remember, operations are addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So the first one we're going to do is addition. Now, this should be reviewed to you. You should have already know these, and hopefully you can do this without any help. But just in case, we're just going to review that. So under notes, we're going to have adding. And there's two different ways to add. So we have adding integers that have the same sign and adding integers that have different signs. So if we're going to look at adding, the first one I'm going to look at is the same sign. And again, you should be writing these notes as I write them. So when I say the same sign, I'm saying they either have both negatives or both positive numbers. So when we have the same sign, you add the absolute value of the numbers and then you keep the sign. Okay, and one thing I like to do is part of the reason I have so many highlighters is I like to keep them highlighted. So we are focusing on the same sign. And I have some examples. So, -3 plus -1 -4 plus -5 plus -8. Pause this video and take a moment to determine the answers of these. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and you wrote down your answers. So this should be, we add 3 plus 1. That would be the absolute value. Remember, when we're talking about absolute value, it's kind of in those lines. So 3 plus 1 is 4, and I keep that sign. Over here, I have the absolute value of 4, absolute value of 5. Okay, those together are 9. And the absolute value of 8, which is 17. Okay, those are all negative, so I keep that sign. Okay, the next one we are going to look at is different signs. I'm going to use a different highlighter. So I want to look at different signs. So the rule for different signs is you subtract the absolute value of the numbers use the sign of the number with the greater absolute value. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples with different signs. So the first one I have, 6 plus a -10. Sometimes you may see this in parentheses like that, just to show you that that's a negative. It does not have to be written that way. Negative 16 plus 5. Negative 4 plus negative 2 plus 6. So here are my 3 examples for this one. So take a moment, pause the video, and see if you can answer these 3. Hopefully at this time, you've already answered these. So if I want 6 plus negative 10, I have 2 different signs. I've got a positive and a negative. The absolute value of 6 is 6. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. So I subtract them. 10 minus 6, which is 4. Now, the greater absolute value was 10. So that means I keep that sign. That sign was a negative. So this becomes negative 4. Okay. The next one, I have the absolute value of 16, or negative 16 is 16. The absolute value of 5 is 5. I subtract them. 16 minus 5 is 11. The greater absolute value is 16. That was a negative sign, so this becomes negative 11. Notice this last one, I included both of these rules. So here, I've got the same sign and then a different one. So we kind of do this in parts. So negative 4 plus negative 2. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2. I add them and I get 6. So this would be negative 6 plus 6. Well, the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. And the absolute value of 6 is 6. So if I subtract them, 6 minus 6, I get 0. Okay, the next one we are going to look at is subtracting integers. This one can be the most challenging of the 4 operations. So here I'm going to set up my notes, subtracting. Okay, to subtract sign numbers, we add the opposite. Okay, what do I mean by that? That can be kind of confusing. So you're really adding the opposite of whatever the sign is. So if the sign is negative, you're adding the positive. If the sign is positive, you're adding the negative. There's a little trick to help you with that. You keep the first number, you change the subtraction sign to addition. And then you change the second number to its opposite. And you're going to notice I'm going to start using more abbreviations. once you do that, you simply follow the rules of adding. So the way to help you remember this is we use a little key term called KCC. We say keep, change, change. Or another way to remember it is simply KCC. It's just a little trick to help you remember. So let's look at some examples with these ones. So the first example is I have -5 minus a -4. Now, we're going to do this one together before you're off on your own. So if I'm following the rules, I'm keeping the first number the same. I'm not changing it. Then it says I'm going to change the subtraction sign to addition. So I am changing this minus to a plus. And then I change this one to its opposite. So right now it's a negative, so I'm going to make it a positive. Now it's its opposite. So now I really have the problem -5 plus 4. That would follow, under addition, different signs. So I just follow that rule. So the absolute value of -5 is 5. The absolute value of 4 is 4. I subtract. 5 minus 4 is 1. And then I keep the sign of the greater absolute value, which was the -5. So I've got to keep that negative sign. Okay, so let me give you a couple more examples. So the next example, -1 minus -35. Now, don't get discouraged if you are still struggling with subtracting integers. This tends to be the most challenging for everyone. I have 10 minus a -8. Remember, you only change signs if these are subtraction problems. So notice every single one of these has a subtraction sign in the middle. The last example I'm going to give you is -20 minus 19. Okay, so go ahead and pause this video and try to solve these 3 problems. Okay, hopefully at this time, you took the time to work these 3 problems out. So now let's do them together. So you should have followed the KCC. So I keep the first and I change the next 2. So I make this addition, I make that a positive. So now I really have -1 plus 35. That's the different sign rule for addition. So I've got 35 minus 1, which is 34. I got a KCC. So I'm going to change the minus to addition, make that negative a positive, and now I really just have 10 plus 18. Or I'm sorry, 10 plus 8, which is 18. The last one, I keep the first, change the addition, and make the 19 negative because it was positive. So you have to, sometimes this is a challenging because we forget to make that a negative. So I really have -20 plus -19, which is -39. If you made a mistake, that's okay. That's why we're reviewing this. Okay, we still have 2 more to do. We have multiplication and division, which I feel like is easier than addition and subtraction. So you'll notice I needed more space, so I'm going to the back. I kind of keep 1 page completely for just whatever topic that is, and I'm going to set it up so that way they're the Cornell notes. because that is how yours should be. I like to use a ruler because I like nice straight lines, but you don't have to. So remember, over here are your questions. So that means if something I go over that you don't understand, you're just going to write a question next to that section of what I'm teaching. So that way later you can ask me if it doesn't get clarified. And we're going to move on. So the next one we have to go over is multiplying. Now, one thing that's nice about multiplication and division is that the rules are the same. Okay, so for multiplying and dividing. Okay, so when I'm multiplying and dividing integers, my rule is the exact same. The only difference is the sign. Okay, so what I mean by that is when we multiply two positives, I get a positive. When I divide two positives, I get a positive. Okay, so one of the things I use to help me with that is this little diagram. So this little plus sign means positive. So if I multiply, and I'm going to use a dot to represent multiplication in this instance, please note that in algebra we do not use X for multiplication. We use a dot or nothing at all. So I have a positive times a positive. That's going to equal another positive. Okay, so whatever those numbers are, we just multiply them and it's going to stay positive. If I'm dividing, the same thing. So if I'm dividing a positive by a positive, it's going to be positive. If I'm multiplying negatives, that is also going to be a positive. So sometimes that's where we mess up a little bit. So if I'm multiplying two negatives, it's going to be a positive. If I'm dividing two negatives, it's going to be a positive. Okay, so some examples here for this. If I have negative 3 times negative 1. I have 7 times 8. If I have negative 30 divided by negative 6. And 44 divided by 4. Okay, so take a minute and solve those 4 examples. Okay, hopefully you paused the video, you solved those 4, so let's go over them. So we just follow the multiplication here. So 3 times 1 is 3. And then because it's a negative times a negative, it's positive, so I have a positive 3. 7 times 8. $56. Negative 30 divided by negative 5. I divide 30 divided by 6. Or I'm sorry, I gave you the answer, but it's 30 divided by 6 is 5. And negative divided by a negative is positive. 44 divided by 4 is 11. So now, after looking at this, the rule here is when you are multiplying or dividing and the signs are the same, it will always be positive. So when you are dividing or multiplying, and the signs are the same, the answer will always be positive. Okay, and that's very important. So let's highlight that. Okay, so we're still on multiplying and dividing, but now, since we did signs are the same, hopefully you recognize that we're going to look at when signs are different. Okay, so these ones are signs are the same. Now we're going to look at when they're different. So when they're different, that means I have a positive times a negative. And hopefully you recognize the pattern. Then instead of having a positive answer, now I'm going to have a negative answer. Same thing with dividing. If I have a positive divided by a negative, the answer is going to be negative. Now the only other way this could be is if it's flipped. So that means if I have a negative times a positive, it's going to be negative. If I have a negative divided by a positive, it's going to be negative. So let's look at some examples here. So I have negative 4 times 2, 7 times negative 3, negative 2 times 4. 6 divided by negative 12. This one's a challenge. And negative 12 divided by 6. Okay, so take a minute, pause the video, and solve these 5. Hopefully you've done that. So let's go over them. So one thing we know is all of these answers are going to be negative. So then it's just your multiplications fact. So 4 times 2 is 8, so negative 8. 7 times negative 3, negative 21. Negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. 6 divided by negative 12. So this is either negative 0.5 or negative 1/2. Either answer would be okay. And then negative 12 divided by 6 is negative 2. So that's why I said that one's a little challenging. What happens if I have a problem like negative 4, negative 2, plus 3 times negative 2? I'm giving you this example, one, so you recognize that if I have numbers in parentheses like this, that means multiplication. And I've also added addition in here. So let's try this one together. Negative 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. Now I add those together. Oh, not paying attention to what I'm doing. A negative times a negative is a positive. This is a perfect example of just going back and checking your work before you're going on to the next step. Because even someone who's been doing this for years like I have, I can make that mistake every once in a while too. So notice now I have a positive and a negative with addition. So this is the opposite sign. So I take the absolute value of 8, which is 8, the absolute value of negative 6, which is 6, and I subtract them. So 8 minus 6 is 2. And I keep it as a positive because the greater absolute value is 8, and that was positive. Okay, at this time the lesson is done, so please move on to your classwork activity.